Hey! Welcome. Ready to explore culture, beliefs, and trends? Stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome to Bridging the Gap. I am your host, Marilyn, and I am a freshman at Columbia University. On this podcast, we will be focusing on exploring a variety of topics which include culture, beliefs, and trends. I am a pre-medical student with an array of interests which include Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so kicking some behind, yoga to help me find my zen, and dance for fun. Thank you for tuning in today. In my last podcast, we heard stories from individuals from different backgrounds and countries about how the pandemic has affected them. Today, we have more guests who will be sharing their own stories. Our first interviewee is Sylvia, who is from Romania. Thank you for joining us today on Bridging the Gap, Sylvia. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal background, and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Sylvia. I go to Columbia. I'm in Cs, and I plan on majoring, I think, in applied math and CS. Maybe a minor in psychology, not so sure yet. And I'm from Romania.
Awesome. So tell us about flying back to Romania as a result of the pandemic. How was the testing and quarantine process?
So I flew back when they told us that campus is not going to be open anymore, I guess, or you had to complete a type of essay if you wanted to stay. So my parents wanted me to come home. And so I think I had to take 3 flights. So I went from New York to Washington, from Washington I had to change airports in Washington, actually, which was a whole mess. And then from Washington to Munich, and from Munich to my home city. So, yeah. And when I arrived, they took my temperature and they made me sign a declaration that I'm going to self-isolate for 14 days. And every day, at least in my case, police came and they were like, oh, are you healthy? Did you take your temperature? Do you have any symptoms, etc., etc.? So that was about it.
So how do you feel the pandemic has affected you and your family?
I mean, I'm in a good situation, I guess. So when I arrived home, because I needed to self-isolate, my parents, my grandma has an apartment that she rents, so I stayed alone in that one, so I wouldn't infect my parents if I had it by any chance. So I stayed there for 14 days, and then I moved back into my house, which is fine. I mean, I don't have as much freedom. I haven't left the house, I think, in 4 to 6 weeks, as in, you have to have a note every time you go out, and you have to state the reason for where you're going out, and if you're getting groceries and stuff like that. And the parks right now are closed, so I can't go on a run, but I have a treadmill at home, which is awesome, so I can run, because I would be insane if I couldn't do anything. And yeah, that's kind of how my life has been going.
So how are you and your family dealing and coping with the current situation?
My parents are still going to work, but from home, so they're still working. It's challenging mentally more than anything else. But I found ways to keep myself busy, and FaceTime is great for keeping in touch with friends. So I FaceTime them and I annoy them every single day, which is fun. And also, the hard part is, I guess, the time difference in my case, which is kind of annoying because my sleep schedule is not that great at the moment. I go to bed at 3 a.m. and wake up at 12, which is not extremely productive, to be honest. But courses Like there are some courses that I would have to take at 2 a.m., but my brain doesn't function, so I just have to watch the recording and stuff like that.
Yes, I know you already touched on this, but how do you feel that Romania handled the situation differently from America?
They take it seriously. I mean, in my city, it's kind of different. So they in my city at least, they kind of take it seriously. I know that in smaller ones, it's not as serious and people still like do whatever they kind of want. We don't have as much cases, which I guess we're lucky because everyone's like, okay, fine. Also, my city is kind of like a university city, so a lot of the students already went back home, so there aren't as many people on the streets, I guess, to like, it's easier to social distance. And at least in my case, police came every day and did their job, so that was great. I'm not sure like in every single city how it works, but they handled it okay-ish from what I've seen. But yeah, the cases are still growing and there's not enough testing. Like, of course, you're not gonna know if like the data they give you and the stats they give you are accurate because not everyone's getting tested. And yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview, Sylvia.
No problem, my pleasure.
Yeah, so if listeners want to get in touch with you, I'll be sure to link your social media information somewhere in this audio. Stay safe.
Yeah, of course.
Our second interviewee is Crystal, who is Cameroonian American. Thank you for joining us today on Bridging the Gap, Crystal. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal background, and where you're from.
Okay, it's really nice that you're having me. I'm Christopher Ritia. I'm a rising sophomore in Columbia College, studying political science and history. My family lives in Maryland, but like both sides of my family is from Cameroon, which is a country in Western Central Africa. I am the youngest of three siblings. I have an older brother and an older sister, and yeah, right now I'm currently back home with my family in Maryland.
Yeah, so as a college student, how do you feel the pandemic has affected your education?
The pandemic has certainly worsened my education in that like Zoom classes are just not of the same caliber as being physically with the professor, the TAs, and being able to physically hold office hours and such, especially when it comes to internet connectivity. I have had moments with my poli-sci professor in which the internet connection on his end was so bad that for 20 minutes his audio was lagging and cutting out. And so I would say the biggest thing with classes is that classes are just a lot more inefficient over Zoom, and I've just had a stark lack in motivation.
Lastly, how has the pandemic affected you and your family, and what are ways in which you guys are currently coping and dealing with the situation?
So for me personally, I would say the biggest impact on the pandemic, me as an individual, not even my family, is my summer opportunities, because two of the internships that I'd applied for and gotten like offers from are like have a high chance of being canceled, and I don't know like whether like remote opportunities that I could do right now in politics that would be paid. And again, I'm really concerned about this because of the student contribution at Columbia, because that is yet to be waived. And I don't know where I'm going to get $3,000 to make up for on my next tuition bill. So there's that. And then my siblings are spread out, and their like plans for the future have been greatly impacted by COVID-19. My sister was supposed to come back home from overseas in April, but she's now going to come back in June. And she was supposed to leave her firm, but because of COVID-19 and the way it's like shut down the economy, she's staying with her firm. And then my brother, he works as a private chef, and he had a job lined up with the NBA, but then the NBA suspended its season, so he's been essentially furloughed, and he still has to go to the grocery store regularly because of his job as a chef. And then I would say the biggest impact on my family has been that, like, most of my relatives are like essential workers. I have at least 3 aunts that work in healthcare, and because of the nature of their job, they can easily be asymptomatic carriers. And in fact, one of my uncles died from COVID-19. The silver lining in all this is that I have really tried to make space for myself and things that I want to do as hobbies. I've taken up poetry writing. I've started reading authors that I care about, not just for Lit Hum, but for myself. So, and getting into media that I've been wanting to get into, but just never had time. And I've tried to stay connected with my friends and family over FaceTime, Zoom, etc., etc.
All right. Thank you very much for doing this interview. If listeners want to get in touch with you, I'll be sure to link your social media information somewhere in the audio description. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.
Our third interviewee is Zimu, who identifies as a Chinese American. Thank you for joining us today on Bridging the Gap, Zimu. Tell us a little about yourself, your personal background, and where you're from.
Hi everyone, my name is Zimu. I'm currently a freshman at Columbia, so I am a classmate of Marilyn's. I was born in Shanghai, China, and then I lived in Shanghai from when I was born to around 11, and then my family moved to LA, where I spent 7 years, and then I went off to college in New York.
So tell us about flying back to China as a result of the pandemic. How was the testing and quarantine process?
So actually, when the pandemic broke out in the United States, me and my mom were both in the US. She was on a business trip, which happens to be in New York, coincidentally. So she was actually living in a hotel, and then I was in my college dorms, right? And then when the pandemic broke out and school paused, my mom was like, come live with me at the hotel because it might be safer, because I have a roommate on campus. So there are a lot of different risk factors since he likes going out. So my mom tried to book the earliest flight back to China because, well, the situation in the United States was escalating, right? Because this was in February sometime, right? So it was definitely on the rise, the coronavirus situation. So we tried to get the earliest flight back. By that time, when my mom left China for her business trip, she talked about the situation, and she's like, everybody's very careful. Nobody's really going outside. So she felt that, let's just say, the people in China are treating it more seriously. So she wanted us to go back as soon as possible. And that's what we did. We got the earliest flight back, which the ticket was insanely hard to get because all the Chinese Americans are trying to rush back. We couldn't even get a direct flight from New York to Shanghai, which is usually the most popular flight there is between US and China. So we had to get a transfer flight first at Taipei, and then we transferred from Taipei to Shanghai. The flight itself was, I would say it was extremely stressful, because while I first thought that this coronavirus situation does not affect young people as much, right? So I was kind of sort of even if I get it, it's just going to be the flu, I'm going to get over it. But then you go to the airport, and then you see all of these people flying back to China, all these Chinese just completely dressed up in full quarantine suits, and they were wearing face masks as well. You could tell that they were treating this very, very seriously, and I really appreciated that. So it was stressful. I feel like me and my mom, we were wearing N95 face masks, and we were wearing gloves and stuff, but compared to some of these people on the flight, we were severely underprotected, you could say. Literally, some of these people get these professional suits, and they're dressed up better than a lot of the healthcare workers that I see working in American hospitals. Yeah, that's how we got back. And we stayed in Taipei for 12 hours which was a really long time for a transit stop. People in Taipei were taking this extremely seriously as well. The airport security were all fully protected. Unlike the securities we saw in New York, I don't know what it is like now, but when we left, people definitely weren't wearing any protective gear at all at the airport.
Okay, so tell us about the quarantine process in China.
Okay, so I would say it's really organized in general. So you get off the plane, right? And then it's about overall in total a 5-hour process, I would say, from when you land to when you get into a hotel. First of all, you can't go back to your home on the first day. That's just a rule. You just cannot, because they can't risk people coming back from overseas carrying the virus and then like spreading it to your family. So they put everyone who arrives in China into these like quarantine hotels where you mandatorily get tested. We arrived at around like 9 p.m. or something, and then we went through this line. We got interviewed by a bunch of like volunteers. By the way, all of these like quarantine workers at the Chinese airport are volunteers. So we got interviewed by them, and then they were asking like, "Where'd you go?" So we were like, "We went to New York. I was in college there." And then they gave us these like little tags indicating like what risk level you're at. Obviously, New York is like the highest risk there is. So we were like orange or something. So we had we had two options basically. They gave us two options. One is you get quarantined at a hotel for 14 days. Yeah, 14 days. So you stay at the hotel completely free, by the way, all of this, I think. At least when we were there, it was completely free. You get quarantined at a hotel for 14 days, or you get quarantined at home for 14 days. But during those 14 days, nor you or your family members can leave the house at all. So we chose the staying at home option. So we like locked ourselves in for 14 days. And then, yeah, it was basically just me and my mom and my grandparents who usually never leave the house anyways. So it wasn't hard for us.
So how do you feel the pandemic has affected you and your family? And what are ways in which you guys are coping with this current situation?
So definitely for me, like the biggest thing is like school is now online, right? I think that's for most students. That's the biggest impact. And for my mom, she works like trading with international like companies, right? It's like primarily in the United States and Europe. And because of the pandemic, trading has halted and I would say waned quite significantly. So I think her business took a huge hit because it's an international trading company, and like her customers from like Spain and especially like Italy were just not in the mood for business. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview with us, Zimu. If listeners want to
Thank you, Marilyn.
With you, I'll be sure to link your social media information somewhere in the description for this audio. Thank you and stay safe. I hope these stories put into perspective what some are facing. If you missed part 1 of this podcast, please check it out and stay tuned for my next podcast as it will be very informative and interesting. Stay tuned for future podcast audios and don't forget to subscribe. Join me on this journey of bridging the gap in hopes of learning and growing with one another. Peace.